Now we know. Okay, so very warm welcome to the audience here in the room, and of course here in the room, also online. My name is Marita Radomska. I'm an associate professor of environmental humanities here at Linköping University, also the director of the Eco and Bioart Lab, which has a pleasure to host today's seminar, and I'm kind of multitasking with Zoom here. So actually today, and now I'm kind of trying to look at this camera and here at people in the room, we have a great pleasure to host Professor Christine Daigle from Brock University, Canada, and also Dr. Evelien Geerts from University College Cork in Ireland at this wonderful seminar called Crawford Lake Encounters, which is one of those, kind of formats of Eco and Bioart Lab seminars where we have a kind of a paper and a response. So it's a very dialogical, in a sense, format. And I think even more so exciting, really, to have it in such a format. So without further ado, I also maybe kind of, some housekeeping before I introduce our guests much more properly today. So we'll start with Professor Daigle's presentation, which will be followed by a 10-minute response by Dr. Geerts. And after that, we'll have also space for Christine response to Evelien's response. And we'll have, a little comfort break, and we will return we will return then, for a Q&A and a kind of joint discussion, basically. Okay, so let me, use my extended memory stick in the shape of my phone. So, of course, Professor Christine Daigle is Professor of Philosophy and Interdisciplinary Humanities at the Brock University, Canada, and currently works as a fellow at the Center for Apocalyptic and Post-Apocalyptic Studies in Heidelberg in Germany, which is why we could actually drag you here. Amazing. She's the author of Post-Humanist Vulnerability, the latest book, which, of course, we strongly recommend any of you in the room and all of you in the room to check out. So Post-Humanist Vulnerability and Affirmative Ethics, that came out in Bloomsbury in 2023. She's also the co-editor of the Post-Humanism in Practice book series at Bloomsbury, as well as of the first book in the series, actually, that came out. And she's also the editor of Interconnections, Journal of Post-Humanism, or Interconnexion, Revue de Post-Humanisme. And we have also here in the room Dr. Evelien Geerts, who is an assistant professor in gender, women's studies, and philosophy at University College Cork, and an affiliated researcher at the Post-Humanities Hub and also at the Eco and Bioart Lab. Their work focuses on questions of identity, difference, and violence, critical post-humanist approaches, and theorizing in crisis times. They previously published in Philosophy Today, Women's Studies International Forum, and Countertext, and also recently curated a double special issue, which I particularly highlight here, on the Somatechnics of Violence in the journal Somatechnics, published by Edinburgh University Press. Right, so now without further ado, really, leaving the space to you and passing the baton, dear Christine.
Thank you so much, Marietta, and thanks everybody for being here. I should say that the work on this presentation was first started at my home in Thorold, so next to St. Catharines, where Brock is located. And so I would just like to acknowledge that that land is the land of the Anishinaabe and Haudenosaunee people, and that many of these people are still living in the area, and it is thanks to their friendship, too often forced friendship, that we have been able to establish ourselves as settlers and do the work we do. So I offer my acknowledgement for this. And it may not be something you are familiar with, doing land acknowledgements here, but this is something that we do. And I think it's important because we're always located in a place, and that place has been occupied by many people, human and non-human, which is what I'm going to be talking about today. I will not ad-lib, otherwise you'll be taken hostage for many hours. So I will read my paper. So Crawford Lake in southwestern Ontario, Canada is what you see on the slide. It is the location for the golden spike. If stratigraphers could agree on a new geological epoch, the Anthropocene, and its onset as of the early 1950s, when intensive nuclear testing took place in the Pacific Ocean, draping the Earth with fine radioactive particles. To declare a new geological epoch, it is necessary to find a globally distributed indicator in strata that indicates a sharp change in the Earth's history, warranting the addition of a new unit on the geological timescale. While many proposals have been made to identify the beginning of the Anthropocene, the Industrial Revolution, the rise of capitalism, or human agriculture and husbandry, only nuclear testing conducted in the 1950s offers the global marker that is sought for. What does a little non-assuming lake in southwestern Ontario have to do with all this? Far from the Pacific Islands where the testing took place. Crawford Lake is a meromictic lake, which means its layers of water don't mix. The special configuration of the lake and its great depth allow for that. This means that the quality of the sediments found at its bottom is very high, being isolated from the atmosphere and any disturbance. Thus, when scientists extracted frozen cores from the bottom, clear layers of sediments, which are called varves, could be observed, and when analyzed, the 1950 layer contained the plutonium generated by the detonations. Crawford Lake was one of 12 candidate sites across the world for the GSSP, Global Boundary Stratotype Section endpoint. So the GSSP, the golden spike, indicating the start of a period of geological time as evidenced by sediments. Crawford Lake produced the clearest evidence for the GSSP, which is poetically referenced as the golden spike. Hopefully I don't mess this up. Moving to the next slide.
Yeah.
Okay, perfect. It is a cold, sunny, and very windy day in February at Crawford Lake. The conditions are perfect to conduct final coring activities to further strengthen the case for the site as the location for the golden spike. My colleague Francine McCarthy's team are hard at work punching holes on the lake's surface and propelling to the bottom of the lake a coring device made of hollow aluminum and filled with a slurry of dry ice. The wind fiercely bites our cheeks as we stand and wait for 20 minutes around the hole in the middle of the lake. Finally, the core is pulled out. Cries of wonder and excitement. Behold, history, non-human and human, neatly spread out in layers. I want to see the infamous 1950 line, but others are also interested in the layers referring to the Crawford's milling activities in the late 1800s, or in the layers referring to indigenous occupation and cultivation of the land around the lake much earlier, in the 14th and 15th centuries. The core can be read in a similar way as one would read tree rings. You can determine the years, the activities around and in the lake, and whether humans were present or not. Cores, like tree rings, record history, human and non-human. It now records an ominous occurring in the geological timescale, the marker for the onset of the Anthropocene in the layer containing plutonium-239. The hole where the latest core is being collected is buzzing with activity. Nearby, you can see that on the left on the picture, a young woman is quietly and meditatively mending a hole that was used earlier in the day. She is on her knees in the slushy layer on top of the lake's ice sheet, and without gloves, she is placing cedar branches around the hole, tapping them in the slush to ensure that they will freeze in place. I gently ask her what she is doing. She is an indigenous person and is conducting a healing ceremony for the lake that was just injured by the scientists' interventions. She attends to each hole created by the research team, communicating with the lake, asking for forgiveness, and contributing to its healing. Indigenous communities have given permission for the scientists' activities, but it is a limited permission. As of now, coring is no longer permitted. The lake is to be left to heal completely. Despite a very strong case submitted to them, stratigraphers attached to notions of longue durée rejected the proposal for the Anthropocene epoch. 1950 is just too soon. Declaring a geological epoch while living in it is just unheard of. And so the battle for the Anthropocene as the newest subdivision of the geological timescale carries on. It will take a decade for the next opportunity to submit the proposal to be open. And my colleague Francine is keen on continuing that battle. And yet, the Anthropocene is our epoch. We live on a planet whose system has been shaped and transformed by humans and non-humans, but the balance of impact and therefore damage is clearly on the side of humans. We have carried our extractivist hubris to a point where the Earth system is thrown off balance, leading to massive disruptions in ecosystems, climate change, and accelerated extinction of species. The current rate of extinction far exceeds what is considered normal. Extinctions are necessary for life to continue to unfold. Many species' existences, including our own, have been made possible because others have disappeared. There is thus an ongoing flux of life in death. However, the sixth mass extinction, concomitant with the Anthropocene, is brought about by anthropogenic activity, which is what distinguishes it from the previous 5 mass extinctions that the Earth has seen. Crawford Lake is also recording that history. Yes. Crawford Lake is small. It is small and pretty. Any time of year, one visits it. The trail that takes you around it is a little less than 1 kilometer long, comprising both gravel trail and wooden walkway. And you can actually see a portion, a small portion of the wooden walkway in the upper left corner of the picture. I'm pointing to it, but that's not helpful. So upper left corner, you can see a little chunk of it. So you can walk that trail in about 10 to 15 minutes, depending on your ability. Or you could, as I did, really take your time, slow down your pace, sit down at the viewing points, stop along the way, breathe in, smell, observe, and listen to the life that surrounds you. I did that a beautiful fall day. While the Conservation Halton website invites visitors to read the signage along the way to the trail that wraps the lake and learn about species at risk, that's their language, one may encounter those species at risk in a different mode if one slows down and opens up one's senses. Ooh, that was too quick. Okay, this one. So during my last outing at Crawford Lake, this is what I endeavored to do. And I enjoyed a few encounters, which were different than the encounter with the scientists and the indigenous person on the surface of the lake. Those were encounters too. So these few encounters I enjoyed on that fall day, while slowly making my way on the boardwalk and observing the vegetation along it, I met this beautiful being. I met a few others on the way, but this one really caught my eye. A hickory tussock moth caterpillar. It was so alluring, its body looking so soft, calling on me to touch it. I did not know it was venomous, but I still did not touch it because it was outside the path that wraps around the lake, doing its thing on this cedar branch. Good for me in many ways because I avoided a major skin irritation. But also, why would I have disturbed it? Ought we not to engage politely with other species, as Tom Van Doren reminds us, quoting Vinciane Després? Was this politeness on my part, or respect for the life of that individual I was meeting? Respect for its thinking, its doing, its world building? What is a caterpillar doing on a cedar branch? A lot, actually, or maybe nothing. Perhaps it's just chilling. Or perhaps it's planning its next meal to gather strength for its upcoming transformation. It may be inspecting the grounds to find the perfect spot for cocooning over the winter. It may have noticed me and wondered, what is a human doing on this path, looking at me? Or maybe it was polite too and just ignored me. Encountering this being made me think about our intertwined temporalities. Compared to the caterpillar, whose lifespan is short, I live an extremely long life. And even during its life, it transforms into another being, a moth. It takes on another shape, something I cannot do aside from growing from a baby human to an old lady. These intersected temporalities meet in this point in time, captured by a photograph, a freeze frame of the unfolding of life. The cedar branch on which the caterpillar sits, is it sitting? Is it sunbathing? Is it going someplace? That cedar branch belongs to a tree, living in a different time scale than we both do, caterpillar and human. The plants, the trees, the lake itself, the multiple critters and humans meeting at this moment of intersected temporalities. What does it mean for these beings to exist in this way, to be entangled and alive in such a different way? I wonder, what is it like for the caterpillar to feel or think my presence, if it does? What is it like for the lake to feel or think our presence, to feel or think our encounter at its periphery? 2 PhD students were accompanying me on this outing. They were attempting the slow walk behind me, but they were catching up on me. Slowing down is so hard. It requires a lot of attention, and then one risks no longer paying attention to what is around. So focused one is on slowing down. So slowing down is almost like a tightrope style of walking. Oops, too fast again.
Too fast again.
Too fast, too slow. See, the difficulty of slowing down. One of my students who was catching up noticed a gentle ruffle at the bottom of a pillar supporting the wooden pathway we were on. A little critter was hidden from us in what looked like a tunnel entry they may have dug right by the pillar. In that little hole, the critter was moving through the dead leaves, making barely noticeable noise, a noise certainly not noticeable at full human walking speed. We saw a bit of movement, we heard the ruffle, but we did not see the critter. We stood still, looking over the railing, eager to see who was there, holding our breath. The still and silent hope of a visual encounter. But that critter, whoever it was, did not come out. That was smart. It heard us coming long before we noticed its presence in the hole. Big, loud, albeit slow, human steps on the boardwalk alerted it to our presence. Perhaps the ruffle we heard and movement we caught a glimpse of were the last moments of an escape from these incoming loud creatures. Did that critter know who we were, what we were? Did that critter know that we were part of the species that has inflicted so much damage on its environment, on the Earth system as a whole? Or did the critter think, those are the beings who planted the pillar by which I can have my house? What did the critter think? Did it care about our presence? Did it know it was humans, or did it think it was predators? Were we predators? Perhaps we were. I can recognize it was smart on the critter's part to remain hidden and to wait for us to be gone, to carry on and come out of its hole and do whatever it wanted to do on that beautiful afternoon. But maybe that is exactly it. It was just going into this hole to follow a tunnel to its home. And I, in a perfectly human way, have reconstructed this endeavor to make sense of it in my encounter with it. What did the critter feel? Did it feel concern, fear, indifference? Was it only doing its thing while we were eagerly hoping for a glimpse of its being, telling ourselves a story in which it had become a character? There is no picture of that encounter, obviously. What you're looking at is not a picture of the encounter, but a fuzzy evocation of what might have been. Because yes, it was an encounter. The critter manifested itself through its movement and shuffling of dead leaves. Someone was there, someone who I did not get introduced to, but humbly, does every being crossing my path or whose path I cross need to be introduced to me? It would be very presumptuous, humanistic even, to think so. Humans are so full of themselves, me included, thinking that we are the only beings engaged in world making, in making sense, in thinking, in storying. Yet the non-human world is bursting with the same kind of activity. Non-human animals, from the more complex to the most simple, create their own Welt. We are unable to recognize it because it is alien to us, but it does not mean it does not exist. Poor Heidegger, who thought the animal is poor in world. How wrong. I guess his mode of being in the world in the Black Forest was at too fast a pace to be able to understand this, let alone perceive it. In our hubris, we declare non-existent any mode of world making that we cannot perceive or comprehend. Just don't be like Heidegger on this and on so many other matters. Question, do plants and minerals have world? Obviously, if they think and feel, they do not think and feel in a way that would be recognizable to us humans. But just like with animals, this is no reason to dismiss the possibility of their world making. Okay, got it. Further on my walk, I noticed one of the numerous trees growing on top of a rock. What did the tree think? What did the rock think? Did it matter to them that we were going around the lake on the human-made path, a wooden pathway meant to contain humans who are so destructive, to prevent them from wandering off and wreaking havoc any further than they already have? Did the rock care as it was busy supporting the tree and preparing to hold it upright for the winter and following seasons? Did it think? Did it care? Did it know? Was it impolite of me, intrusive even, to take a photograph of that lovely embrace? But wait, was this a lovely embrace? Or was it a squeezing, a choking, the tree using the rock as an anchor? The rock allowing the tree to go up and further up? Or was the tree using the rock as a springboard as it jumps up in the sky, a jump I or the caterpillar or the critter cannot see or experience because our lives go by so fast, while that of the tree and that of the rock, that is a different story. A story unfolding in a different time scale. Many of these embraces take place at Crawford Lake, In some instances, the rock prevents a fall into the lake for the tree holding onto it. A longue durée plunge into the waters, calling for it, softly, quietly, patiently. Speaking of trees, another type of encounter was equally generative for my thinking. I came across this tree growing out of a dead trunk. They are called nursery trees. This kind of growth is a little more spectacular than the more common, beautiful, joyful, fruitful proliferation of fungi on tree trunks, I think, which are also to be found plentifully at Crawford Lake. There are many nursery trees in a particular area around the lake. This wondrous occurrence probably taught the Wendat people who encountered it, the indigenous people who settled around Crawford Lake, it probably taught them while walking the land that there is a continuum between life and death, and that they are necessary to each other. Western humans have resisted that thought, fought it even, and continue in some circles to pursue human enhancement and immortality. Fools. Nursery tree. The name evokes notions of care, love, embrace. Does the dead trunk sing nursery rhymes to the tree growing within it, contributing to its striving in a soothing and encouraging way? We, of course, would be unable to hear those songs. They are not for humans, or for caterpillars and critters, for that matter. The intermingling of life and death, living death, vibrant, as Nina Lieke refers to it, dying life, life that unfolds and moves toward its death, to relive in another form, as another tree, feeding off it, growing through it. Caterpillar-like tree morphing into another tree. Does the caterpillar not experience some death to be reborn as moth? Is its life cycle encompassing the life-death life cycle? And why would we say no to this? Turn a blind eye and not recognize that these apply not just to non-humans, but to humans as well. Again, how hubristic of us. There were many more encounters, so many individual trees, plants, critters, birds. Some I did see and could observe, and many others who remained hidden, intentionally or not, doing their thing. The buzzing of life living. I was trying to immerse myself, to absorb it, to observe, to sense, to meet life in its various unfoldings. But I was also trying to know, to understand, how so very human. But that raised a much more interesting question for me. In my attempt to record an experience of encountering the non-humans, the animals, plants, minerals around and in the lake, as well as the lake itself, I was still missing something. I encountered Kioniwariwan, or did I? This is the Wendat place name for the lake and surrounding area. Indigenous peoples lived in the area for a long time before European settlement. Notably, the Wendat and Atewandaron, Iroquoian-speaking peoples, have occupied the site, cleared some land and grew corn, as evidenced by pollen sediments. Traces of villages and long houses have been unearthed. The village was abandoned by the early 1500s, but Indigenous people continued to spend time in the area. As circumnavigator of the lake, I could not see the traces left by Indigenous peoples. Traces of the Crawfords, after whom the lake is now named, were visible, however. George Crawford acquired what was then called Little Lake, it is small, in 1883, and he built a lumber mill and operated a hotel. The renamed Crawford Lake was acquired by the government in 1968. Sedimented traces of the lumber mill operations are also present in the cores extracted from the lake. Conservation Alton, the body in charge of Crawford Lake, maintains a reconstructed village with 3 longhouses owned to artifacts dug out through archaeological searches. Wandering through the village and longhouses, one gets a sense of that former indigenous presence. And the lake has recorded that presence, keeping corn pollen in its sediments as some precious substance. I, however, encountered Kioni Waliwayan in a different register. I knew about it, I visited the longhouses, contemplated the objects displayed, reflected on the movements of indigenous populations and how they too impacted the lake, the famous anthropogenic impact everyone is concerned about in the Anthropocene. But indigenous impact was not of an anthropocenic magnitude, far from it. Taking this knowledge with me on my walk around the lake, I could imagine indigenous presence in the woods and on the lake. I could only imagine it as a ghost of times long past. This too was a form of encounter, a ghostly one. The Crawford ghosts were also present, more concretely, as remains of buildings dating from their ownership period could be seen along the path. So the range of encounters was wider than first anticipated or experienced. I learned it was necessary to be attentive to the non-human also in ghostly form. This lake that I was circumnavigating, what did it know? Did it know I was there? It knows that others have been there, humans and non-humans. It contains traces of their having been there, of their own various temporal unfoldings, coming to life, living, dying, feeding off each other, caring and nurturing for each other, or destroying others in the case of some human beings. The spectacularly preserved sediments at its bottom constitutes the living memory of Crawford Lake, a memory that continues to grow. The lake keeps a record. It keeps a record of its environs, but of the whole Earth system as well. Indeed, even those faraway humans and their detonating fabrications in the early 1950s are now inscribed in the lake's memory. This too is in the record. The destructiveness of Anthropos is registered in the sediment layers. The lake knows. It knows anthropogenic impact need not be as extensive as it has been. It knows anthropogenic impact is variable. Encountering Crawford Lake and the various beings at it can teach us that other ways are possible. Thank you.
Thank you so much, Christine. Big applause. Thank you so much. So just a reminder to everyone that, also joined us, because there are people joining, after we started. Now we'll move to response from Dr. Evelien Geerts, and then, we'll have a little break, and after that we'll return for the discussion. So Evelien, the floor is yours, of course.
Thank you. Quick question. Can everyone hear me well? No echoes. Okay, great. Ooh la la. Well, good morning, everyone. Thank you, Dr. Radomska, Marietta, if I may, for that lovely introduction earlier, and of course for inviting me to respond to Professor Christine Daigle in the context of this Eco and Bioart Lab seminar. And thank you, Christine, if I may, for your thought-provoking but also care-filled paper. I really enjoyed thinking with you, or rather with you, and in relation with and to all of the more than human assemblages you became a part of when visiting Crawford Lake. Like proto-existentialist Emmanuel Levinas, not only known for his criticism of Heidegger, if you want to go there, but also for his narration of his encounter with Bobby, the wandering cam dog that takes up a central role in The Name of a Dog, and like alternative philosopher extraordinaire Jacques Derrida, and his rather fleshy face-à-face with his chat, or maybe even chat, in The Animal That Therefore I Am, you too speak of your own situated and embodied encounters with that one in modern Western thought, and also practice, alas, has been regarded as non-human, often to either be completely pushed aside and ignored, or tamed and cultivated, and therefore also reduced to something lesser than, or exploited and used up, or a violent combination of all of the foregoing, right? Your encounter with Crawford Lake, its layered icy core violently pulled out, quite ironically, proved that humankind has been writing its own post-Anthropocenic story or apocalyptic endgame for quite a while. And then the contrast between this rather disruptive scientific practice with the local indigenous lake healing ceremony that completely disrupts the modern Western, dare I say, Hegelian self-other dynamics we have gotten so used to and very comfortable with. Then your own face-à-face with the furry yet venomous caterpillar that, like Derrida's chat, might have been measuring you up and regarding you as something it is not. The critter in hiding that is then conscious and wise enough to not come too close to that animal we call human, and the various so-called nursery trees that are sprouting up from dead trunks. Well, all these encounters uniquely address questions that are concerned with the entanglements between life and death, human, non-human, and dehumanized, and the often gruesomely racialized bionecropolitics operating behind these three categories. And as you pointed to at the end of your presentation as well, materiality, immateriality, and even spectrality, as Crawford Lake, as you put it so beautifully, keeps a record of its environs, but of the whole Earth system as well. And will probably keep doing so long after we humans are gone. Now, given your paper's richness, and I guess the overall project's richness, there are many topics and questions I could zoom in on, and I've touched upon a few already. But there were three series of concepts, let's say, that kept coming back to me. And I'm hoping that these concepts will help us structure a discussion a bit more later on as well. So I'll just name them and then I'll focus on them. So first of all, space, place, and mapping practices. Two, time, dates, and dating practices in relation to the Anthropocene. And then last but not least, three, vision and revisioning. A very important feminist practice, right? So, one, space, place, and mapping practices. So the first thing that actually came to mind after having read your paper, Christine, was to go online and look up Crawford Lake on Google Maps. That not only tells us a bit more about how we humans tend to nowadays rely on easily accessible digital tools of visualization and orientation, but the taken for granted act of looking up something on the digitalized map also reveals something about how we, or at least some of us, have been raised to look at the world and consequently think and theorize about that world through zooming in or out or both. These movements are far removed from the intimate face-à-face encounters you describe, and both zooming in and out seem to have the capacity to turn into what feminist epistemologist Donna Haraway once called totalizing God tricks. And in a way, that also makes sense considering the violent nature of mapping, right? So the art and science of cartography, together with travel writing and narratives of exploration, were part of and contributed to, and still are contributing to, Western imperialism and colonialism. Representing the world through the visual geographical concept of space, maps literally map out land and territories, as well as the specific resources, peoples, and other important features or features deemed important to these territories. To map, mark, and delineate space means controlling and owning it, theoretically, epistemologically, and politically speaking. Maps do not simply reflect the world as it is, or what those in charge of these visualization tools want it to be, but they also demonstrate specific ways of looking at the world. Rather than mere visual symbolic objects, maps are lively, material, historical screens onto which geopolitical power relations and discourses, memories and rememberings and tracings that you also talk about, Christine, ways of thinking, seeing, and world-making are projected. In more Deleuze-Guattarian and even Brydodian terms, maps are onto-epistemological relational cartographies, right? Now, the end result of my potentially retotalizing Google Maps search was quite interesting, though. So I noticed that the Crawford Lake Conservation Area is located right in between various nature reservations, equestrian hotspots, and fancy golf clubs, which tells us something more about how the environmentally conscious act of preserving nature cannot be disentangled from the modern Western extractive capitalist obsession with delineating, exploiting, and cultivating nature, right? Now, two, a shorter reflection with regards to time, dates, and dating practices. So this is the second, well, conceptual tripartite, basically. Whether we are said to be living in mega crisis, polycrisis, or permacrisis times, it sort of has become clear that we, and I'm purposely talking about humanity here, are running out of time. 6 of the so-called 9 planetary boundaries have been transgressed already, suggesting that, and I'm quoting the 2023 Nature report here, Earth is now well outside of the safe operating space for humanity. And the clock has already stopped ticking for many other species, intersecting temporalities or not, right? Now, I am intrigued by the idea that Crawford Lake could be seen as the new kind of embodied indicator of the start of the Anthropocene. And I would actually also love to pick your brain about anti-colonial philosopher Sylvia Wynter's suggestion that 1492 could be regarded as the philosophical start date of the inhumane humanism that has been propelling the Anthropocene. But the cynic in me, and maybe this was because of the Heidegger remark earlier, but the cynic in me, I guess, wonders whether all these dating, naming, and labeling practices, at the end of the day, really matter. It's not that I'm doubting the practice of philosophy, but still, differently put, do these things matter when Crawford Lake's wounds, so to speak, are intended to with the attentiveness, respect, and care that they actually require? And then 3, last but not least, some reflections with regards to vision and revisioning. And these 2 concepts are obviously kind of connected to the 2 foregoing reflections, but also to, I guess, the deconstruction of the modern Western, and for me, again, Hegelian self-utter dynamics, a dynamics that has been, one could say or argue, subverted by Derrida's Schatz, looking at Derrida's naked, fleshy body, turning the movement of gazing from human to animal a little bit on its head, or the playful destruction and love offered by Levinas's camdog, Bobby, who rehumanized those that were dehumanized on the daily, or, and maybe more importantly, the indigenous person tending to Crawford Lake's wounds, thereby radicalizing Levinas's ethics as first philosophy and practicing it to its fullest post-humanized extent, honoring transcorporeal living, as posthumanist thinker Stacey Alamo would call it, or to describe it with one of your quotes from posthumanist vulnerability, Christine, namely that we, and I'm quoting you here, need a new ethos, an attitude towards ourselves and toward life, one that is based on a shared cross-species material vulnerability. And in order to get there, to conclude this short response paper, but also to echo Donna Haraway again, this time from Modest Witness at Second Millennium, we are probably in need of a different optics, an optics that is all about making a difference in the world by paying attention to, as Haraway says it, the interference patterns on the recording films of our lives and bodies, or differently put, the human-made wounds of and in Crawford Lake. And I'm going to keep it here, and I hope that there's plenty of material to get the discussion started. But thank you. Thank you, Marietta.
Thank you so much, Evelien. This was amazing. And
Thank you.
there is so much food for thought here. Would you like to respond?
Well, I mean, one thing I really want to make sure to say with regards to some of the last few things you mentioned, in terms of the indigenous person giving their attention to the lake and mending the lake and everything. As you were speaking, I thought, so I scanned my brain and I think I'm right and I will check that, but I do think that there's very, very few pictures that actually capture her activity. And this was the only picture in my own set of pictures from that coring activity where we could see what she was doing. And we're not even seeing fully what she's doing. And so her mode of attention to the lake, which is so important and is a mode of attention that I think we should work to develop for ourselves, is not the center of attention. What's the center of attention whenever you have images of what goes on at Crawford Lake with regards to the research on the Anthropocene? It's the coring, because that's what we do. We get on the lake, and isn't it cool? We're on the surface of the lake when it's frozen enough, and we're drilling and coring and violently assaulting the site to get the data we want. And so I think that this in itself, like the imagery around that research activity on the lake, and like I said, I'm going to check and I'm going to access my colleague's bank of photos. Like she has a zillion probably, but I want to see now how many capture the two types of activities which are so radically different in their approach to the site. So yes, I wanted to say that, and I have so much to say about whether it matters what we call this epoch as well, because I mean, there's been so many different proposals. Some of them I like, others I don't like so much, and what I would say, I mean, we can think of the Plantationocene, the Wastocene, the Capitalocene, the Cthulhucene. I saw a new one the other day, but there was also the Thanatocene.
Yeah, we have a colleague, who is like working on anthropomemes, and has this like gigantic.
Yes.
Yeah. So I mean, people have.
Steve Mans wrote a little book in that series. I can't remember the name of. And he has a chapter where he talks about the neologism scene. And I'm like, yes. So to capture this kind of proliferation. Exactly. And I think I like to stick to Anthropocene as this kind of like umbrella term, which is far from perfect. Because I think all the other ones are in a way capturing different aspects of our mode of being. And are complementary to one another. You can't really think the Anthropocene in isolation, for example, but it certainly helps to consider the Anthropocene as that which fuels the Capitalocene, the Thanatocene, et cetera, So to use these different terms to zoom in on specific practices and activities without losing sight of all these other practices with which they're intermingled, because I don't think we can really fully isolate one type of human activity. And in that sense, geologists are busy with, like, it's a very scientific endeavor. Like, we need a global marker and we need to find it everywhere. We need evidence and strata. And it's a very specific kind of natural science approach to the problem. I mean, my colleague, who's a geologist, Francine, was absolutely appalled that the proposal was rejected. I don't care, because I still think we live in this perma-crisis time that we need to think through. And I think it's a good call for us to engage in that reflection. And the proliferation of terms contributes to that reflection.
And also, I think that, it's to a huge extent, I mean, like, this became, because I mean, obviously all those discussions around Anthropocene as like, who is the human in the Anthropocene, etc., has been going on. But I think that, to a great extent, this became so much of a kind of like, social science and, humanities concept that it does not matter, really, right? I mean,
I mean, my colleague Martin Head, who was part of the Anthropocene working group, would profoundly disagree with this, and he actually goes so far as to say that this should be a term used by geologists only. And I'm like, sure, you do you. But yeah, I mean, Yeah, but one other thing I would like to say, and this is something I came across recently. It's a text by Ilvia Wilk. It's called Death by Landscape. And she says in one of the essays, she says that she prefers Capitalocene to Anthropocene because it's more hopeful. And I think what she's trying to say here is that Anthropocene seems to inscribe in human nature and the human being, so-called human nature, like
if there is one,
like if there is one, right? Like that we can't help but be destructive. And she says Capitalocene opens up the possibility for other ways of doing things. And I think, okay, so you could use any of the scenes and say that. So we've been engaged in this kind of destructive activity, but there's another way. And so to think of not so much, okay, what have we done? Yes, we need to think that through, but in pursuit of how can we do otherwise? Yeah.
Thank you so much. I think I don't know, Evelyn, do you want to do you have a comment? Yeah. I see like the facial expressions.
Yeah, I have expressive eyebrows. Apologies for that. No, thank you so much, Christine. This is super fascinating. And I'm so happy to be part of this. I agree with your last comment. I do think I think it's interesting to think about the Capitalocene as kind of but in a way, I personally go to Donna Haraway and the term of the Cthulhucene because I feel like there is this element of the post-Anthropocenic already present in there that kind of expresses what the planet could look like if that transcorporeal living, which is actually taking place all the time, but would be respected from the human side. So that would be kind of my preferred term. And then at the same time, look, maybe I am in an emo existentialist state or something, I don't know, but yeah, that hope aspect, I'm not sure if we can actually attach that to the Anthropocene or the Capitalocene. I really would keep that for the Cthulhucene for something completely kind of new, while it's also rooted in the old. I'm not making a lot of sense, but I wanted to throw in that concept already because I do find it to be quite powerful. Because it is situated, but it is also revisioning our world destroying practices and potentially also the world making practices. So I just wanted to throw that in. I'm not sure.
Yeah, I mean, I don't think I have identified a personal favorite among the proliferation of terms. I mean, I do find that they are evocative, each in their own way, and they help direct our thinking to specific aspects of a global problem. And again, I think, and even the Cthulhucene, I think, needs to be thought along with these other alternative terms, so that we can, because it's such a complicated problem with, I mean, we're talking about entanglements, no kidding. And so we can't really pluck one out and say, this is it. So, yeah.
Thank you so much. I think I would like to, do you want to say something? Or because I'm I'm deciphering the faces. I think I would like to thank you both extremely much, and of course we have space for wider conversation with folks here in the room, physical folks that we have here, and the kind of more virtual ones online. But I think that now it's good to have a little break for bathrooms, I don't know, coffees or things like that. So we reconvene 11, so like in 8 minutes from now. And continue. So thank you so much, and I'm stopping the recording actually here.